Hey folks, let's kick it off. So it took more than a minute. Sorry for the delay. I think there might be some people that will be coming in, so don't worry. Welcome to OLX Masterclass Mobile, mobile edition, because I have a hunch that there will be more editions for different disciplines coming in. I'm your host, I'm Kuba, Head of Engineering at OLX, working here for, well, almost 5 years now, so quite a long time in one company. And I guess at the end, I will be trying to answer some of your questions about, well, hopefully not only mobile, but maybe about the company as well. But I'm pretty sure that this is not what really you came for. You came for the great presentations we have. And our first speaker, Dominik Roszkowski. So small applause. Yay. Or huge. This will be what's so special about Flutter anyway. Quite a title. Dominik is a Google developer expert in Flutter, very eager to create beautiful apps for mobile and desktop. He has been using Flutter since its beginning, and he has experience with native platforms as well. So, Dominik, stage is yours.
Thank you so much. All right, let me just see if everything's all right. How are you doing? Everybody good? Yeah. All right, cool. Good to see you. It's actually my first time giving a talk in Poznań, which I think is odd, and I really wish like the Flutter events would come back to this nice city. It's been super nice traveling here, and I look forward to chatting with you after the presentation. Really, I think that's the best value that you can get out of that, just being able to chat with each other. And I'm going to try to convince you maybe to try out Flutter if you haven't done it just yet. And obviously, there's been many discussions and quarrels about whether like Flutter is better than KMM or React Native and stuff like that. And of course, like there's never going to be a true answer to this. But at the same time, I hope that after tonight's presentation, you will just try to see for yourself what's so special about Flutter. All right, so it went too far. All right, so thank you for the introduction. The bio was spot on. I'm Dominik, and if that's easier, you can call me Dom. And currently, I'm working on a product called Visible, which is a mobile app for people with long COVID. And what is special about this project is that we are actually integrating a lot with native APIs. We are using Bluetooth band, we're using camera, we're using background processing. So all these things that typically are not connected with Flutter. Whenever anybody asks about Flutter, they may be hesitating because like it doesn't support background processing and stuff like that. And in fact, it's not a big deal at the moment. So things like that, they can be solved. And what we do at Visible is actually proving that in a really good way. Before we start, I would like you, like during the presentation, and if you could just scan this QR code, you will end up on the like a poll page where you can just put your thoughts or doubts or hesitations or things that you feel are not clear about Flutter, especially maybe if you're actually opposed to Flutter in some way. Maybe you're just prefer using native. I would really like you to share your thoughts. And I hope that some of the topics that I mentioned tonight will help you just avoid these doubts. But definitely, that's the thing that I would like to understand from my audience, whether like you feel that maybe Flutter is just immature or like Google's gonna kill it or whatever. Things like that, I would really appreciate if you could just share it with me. And another thing that I would like to try with you, and I hope that you will feel comfortable with that, is to do a little bit of experiment. And if I may ask you to all stand up for just a brief second, because this is gonna be an exercise for me and for you. Thank you so much. So I would like to sit down people that have never used Flutter or they don't know what Flutter even is. Like if there's anybody that doesn't know what Flutter is. All right, cool. I hope that after today you will have something to try out. Now I would like to sit down people that maybe use Flutter, but it's not their daily job. They don't use Flutter every day. All right, folks that are standing up, these are my people. And thank you for coming, and I hope that you will have also a good time tonight, and you will find some arguments to prove that Flutter is really cool. And at the same time, to the rest of you, if you have doubts or questions about Flutter, you can easily ask these people probably, I hope you're okay with that, but at the same time, I hope that they will have the same opinion about Flutter that I have, and they will also be able to share their views in the same way as I do. Thank you so much. A round of applause to the people that stayed standing. Thank you so much. All right. This was a little exercise, and I hope you felt okay with that. Thank you so much. So Flutter. And when you talk about Flutter, there's so many angles that you can look at this, as with any complex technology. But typically, like when I say Flutter, I tend to just like have an umbrella term like framework or toolkit or toolchain. There's so many things that make up Flutter. And like you can say, and I won't bore you with technical definitions because it's not the point of that. But there, like Flutter started as an experiment, like in 2014, 2015, in the time where like 3 or 4 people decided that they wanted to improve Chrome's performance. That's a really cool piece of history, of computer history, because as we know, Chrome is an like absurdly big project, and it was very difficult to find any new ways to improve its performance back then. So at some point, they just realized there's just nothing more that they can do realistically, and everything that they would try would just take them months to improve. So what they decided is just to do something really crazy, which is like just get rid of all the HTML and CSS and JavaScript processing that is included in Chrome, and they came up with a project that they called Sky back then. So that was the first code name of Flutter, Sky. They spent some time on that. I think after 2 weeks, they had a real working prototype. And they tried to find a use case for this. It wasn't easy. Like Chrome was there, and it would take years to change the paradigms that make a web possible. So they just decided to go after something completely different. Still, like if anybody worked on mobile in 2015, they may remember like how different the world was back then. They just decided that Flutter may be a good choice for mobile. So they decided to just start with running this on Android, and it worked. Later, they actually used the name Flutter, came up with a logo and all that stuff. And since then, they expanded to all of these platforms. And potentially, there's going to be even more of them. So right now, Flutter is just a really cool tool that lets you build apps for all of these platforms that you can see on the screen, and potentially even more in the future. And when you look at Flutter, I think the most important piece of that is the engine, the thing that they actually came out back then, which is the module that is responsible for rendering the UI, handling the user gestures, the things like accessibility and stuff like that. This is really the core thing that makes Flutter what it is. And on top of that, or like around that, there's many, many different layers that make it up. So for instance, if you look from the side, like on all these layers, the thing that really stands out compared to other frameworks, especially for me, and that lets you actually not be afraid of reaching out to the native realm, is embedder and runner combination. So this is like the bottommost layer of Flutter as a framework, as a toolkit, is the embedder and runner combination. And this is essentially, so if you have a Flutter project, you will see that this is basically a native app, Android or iOS or Windows or Mac app that wraps around a canvas that Flutter engine is using to render almost anything. And in principle, you could render anything with Flutter. The team behind Flutter, they just decided to render mobile UI, but thanks to the fact that this engine is kind of platform agnostic, you can basically draw any pixels. So whenever you can draw pixels, you can use Flutter. And the embedder and runner combination, which is like the C++ and native code, like on Android it's Kotlin, on iOS it's Swift or Objective-C. These are just native projects, and thanks to that, and we're going to talk about this in a second, you can basically open the Flutter project in Android Studio, IntelliJ, Xcode, Visual Studio, and all these IDEs that are not tightly coupled with Flutter in any way. And this is something that, especially for native developers, and I know that we have a couple of them here, this is something that makes it really easy to just jumpstart and kick off any Flutter project. And then, of course, the topmost layer, this is the one that you, in your daily life, work with, the framework, the thing that was built on top of the engine. So this is what, like, Google had to build just to make Flutter ready for mobile. So these are all the high-level components like scaffolds, like buttons, like text fields, also the accessibility support, things like colors, theming. We're going to have a nice talk today about theming. So theming is also included in framework. And this is what actually makes your life really easy, and you can rely on dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of different ready widgets and UI components for you, and all the helpers, utils, whatever you call them. And at the same time, because this is so modular, there's also a lot of primitives that are built that on top of which all these higher level components are built. So if you want to build your own text editing system, and I know we're going to have a talk about TextKit 2, it's also possible with Flutter. You have access to text editing controllers, to paragraphs, to text selection and stuff like that, which is really powerful. And all of that is open source. All of that is open source, so whenever you inspect any given class, you can see the source code, the comments. And whenever, like, I come from the Xamarin background, which was one of the best multi-platform, cross-platform tools at its time, but at the same time, it had all these issues that, for instance, the native project was hidden, or the source code was not accessible easily when you wanted to look up some kind of class. You had to go to the, back then, just some strange Microsoft website to see what's behind that. And with Flutter, it's all open source, just under one click away. And this makes it really easy to implement your own design system, to make your own components and stuff like that. And yeah, like looking at this layer, you can see like that typically you as developer, you will only work with this topmost layer. And this is where you would use language called Dart. Dart, which I must say is like just a kind of normal language. Like I would say this is a language that doesn't stood out in any significant point, but at the same time, I think it's approachable to anyone. And I'm going to talk about Dart in a second as well. So from the business point of view, and this is something that I think is also very important to enforce, is that Flutter is just a great tool to build apps. It doesn't really matter like what's underneath to the business person or like to the decision makers. And I think that if you start with this notion, and I know I sound like a salesman, I know, but I'm really trying to sell you Flutter. So this is quite obvious, because I'm really enjoying this ride for the last 5 years. And I must say that at the moment, there's still nothing that would make me as happy developer as Flutter makes me. So this is something that I would like to really show to you today. There's a couple of things that make Flutter also really special. And the fact that there's this embedder and runner combo, which is just a native project, means that opens up a lot of possibilities for you as a when you need to access native functionalities. So I mentioned at Visible we are using Bluetooth and camera and background processing and things like that, or like even custom push local notifications. And because Flutter is integrated very well with these native applications, it's possible to combine this in a way that until recently there was not easy way to do with any other, or like with any other major framework. So for instance, you can have Flutter running inside a native app. You can have native views running inside Flutter. You can combine Flutter app with React Native app, and things like that are possible because you just essentially have a native project underneath. And one of the greatest examples that I always, and I use it daily as well, is Sonos app, which they have recently, like I think 2 years ago or a year and a half, something like that, they decided to redo their onboarding flow. And what they did is they decided to combine iOS and Android, and they built their onboarding flow, which is an essential part of the app, right? If you imagine you have this myriad of devices and potential flows and failures and Bluetooth integration, and you have to look for the device over the network, stuff like that. And this means that there's a lot of native integration built into the onboarding flow, and at the same time, you care about the fidelity, the interactions, the animations, the performance, and they just decided to use Flutter, which is amazing, and they have a Flutter team inside that works on that, whereas the rest of the app is completely native. And I think this is one of the greatest examples where like the Flutter, despite its obvious limitations, which if you dig deeper, you will notice that it's not like a one-size-fits-all solution. It can work like that. And if you look for like some of the top Flutter apps out there, and this is not like a comprehensive list, and this is just a list that I created based on my personal phone. There's this app called Flutter Shark, and you can look up which apps on your Android phone use Flutter to some, like you don't know necessarily whether they are using Flutter as a primary thing, or maybe they just have a single screen or a single component, but these are the apps. So like Google even uses this in like pretty important apps like Google Pay in India, not in Poland, unfortunately, but like Google Pay is using Flutter. And they recently announced that YouTube Creator Studio is using Flutter. Google Stadia, rest in peace, was using Flutter. And in Poland, there's a couple of great apps that also use Flutter. My favorite, Radio Nowy Świat, which is like a cool radio station, they also have an app with Flutter. In PostFresh, they also created this app from scratch in Flutter. And I noticed that even OLX, it's not listed here, but OLX has some kind of signs of using Flutter. I'm not sure where. I would love to know which of the parts of the app are using Flutter. So if you could just share some light, it would be amazing. So these are the big names, and they invested their time. And at the same time, all the small startups like ours, they also bet on Flutter. And I think this is a sign of like a real maturity right now. All right. So one thing that I want to convey to you today, especially because I think most of us are developers or have some connections to developers' life. One thing that I think makes Flutter really different from native development, from Xamarin development, Cordova, Ionic, Clojure UI, anyone maybe, is the developer experience. And I think this is something that really made a difference a few years ago, and especially the fact of having things like hot reload and hot restart. This was revolutionary at its time. Nowadays, not so much, but still is a really big thing. Dart as a language, and we're going to show a couple of examples of that just to convince people that may be just frowning upon this. Then, of course, there's the reactive approach to the UI, which has not always been a thing. Only like React and React Native kind of made it really popular. And I think the fact that right now this is a standard way to approach UIs. And this access to the native platform, native embedders. This is something that really makes a huge difference in developer experience. Let's start with the hot reload. Hot reload, for those that have not experienced that, is just basically possibility to see the UI updating in real time as you save your code. And this is possible thanks to Dart being Dart. And all these like really complicated things that are built into Dart compile toolchain. But in short, it means that anytime you press Control-Save or Command-S, it just reloads the part of the code that you just changed on the device or on the emulator. And it happens so fast, like computers are extremely fast. It happens so fast that it really ties nicely with your iteration cycle. Typically, you may have like a couple of seconds of typing, then a couple of seconds of thinking, and so on and so forth. That's at least my approach. And the fact that you can have this feedback loop happening almost instantaneously means that you don't lose time on compiling and so on. And I know that nowadays, like even with Swift UI apps, you just have to wait like 5 seconds for the app to start. And with the Swift UI, you have a really nice preview, the same with Jetpack Compose. But at the same time, like if you recompile or rerun your app, you lose your local state. You have to go back to the page that you've been developing, or you have to have some hacks. Whereas here, you just reload the code in place. And the funny thing about Dart is that it will optimize the code every time you run it. So this is also really cool, especially like only in debug mode. But this makes a huge difference. And what if you just want to restart the app from start? You use hot restart. And this essentially wipes out your local state without restarting your native app. So as long as you don't have any state or anything persisted on the disk that would change your logic, then you're fine just to hot restart the app, and this is also taking like 2-3 seconds if you're not doing anything wrong. So this has been a real revolution back then, and of course, like with Expo on React Native, you have very similar experience, but this is still a little bit better than what Expo used to be. And cool. And Dart itself. Dart as a language You can have many different opinions about Dart. For me, it's just a really convenient language. It doesn't have any bells and whistles like some of the languages, but at the same time, it's quite powerful and convenient to use. It's like C-style language, so if you have any experience with C#, Java, a little bit of Kotlin, it's going to feel very familiar. And this is what we do as mobile developers, right? Like we tend to switch between languages. So having a language that doesn't block you, that doesn't feel unfamiliar, this is quite important. So for instance, recently, so Dart can work in 2 modes. Ahead of time compiled, this is the one that is really optimized. This is what runs on the device. It can be obfuscated. It can be tree shaken and things like that, so that is very optimized. But at the same time, it can also run in just-in-time compile mode, which means that it allows for hot reload. And is, of course, a little bit slower. It has all the debug symbols and things like that. But being able to compile the same language, the same code into 2 modes, this is what opened up the possibility of hot reload and hot restart. Also, Dart used to be, it's still possible to transpile Dart to, or compile Dart to JavaScript, which means that it's a little bit more flexible than some of the languages. It doesn't put so many constraints, but definitely if you want to have like a real strict type safety and null safety, and what is important about Dart 3 is that it's soundly null safe, which is like a mathematical proof that the Dart is null safe. It's even, I mean, I'm not a computer scientist, so it's very hard for me to explain this, but it's really cool to know that this language is still developing, and it went like a long route. It used to be just a younger brother of JavaScript, and right now it's a really serious language that you can use not only for mobile apps, but also for backend and desktop, which, for instance, we are using. So this is really cool about Dart. But at the same time, because it's always catching up with some of the other languages, it brings a couple of nice features every now and then. So for instance, recently, it added support for pattern matching, for record types, which is like a type of data models. And for instance, things like having a switch on a duration, which is like just a class, and being able to, of course, this is a naive implementation of the time formatting, don't use that in production, but having this kind of switch statements is really convenient, and it feels like functional programming. And if anybody used to work with F# or any other functional language, they will feel very familiar with that. The other thing is that when you write widget code, the UI code for Flutter, you can also use this kind of nice syntactic changes, and they don't affect performance. They are really convenient to look at, and having like sealed classes means that you have guarantee that there's no other instance, no other type of this subtype of this class, and you can do exhaustive switches easily. So for instance, if you have different states of your let's say I'm using block, so if you have different states describing your block, then you can do exhaustive switches on your states and be able to render corresponding UI components, which is kind of cool. And this is for the nerds, but at the same time, it means that it's very, the language is very concise sometimes. And it looks like any other C-type language. And of course, without all this work that Google has put and all the open source contributors have put into Flutter as a UI framework, it wouldn't be a valid tool to choose. So there's like hundreds of different widgets that you can use, and of course, all this like navigation patterns, accessibility support, internationalization support, things like being able to draw anything on the canvas. These are the parts that make up the UI framework of Flutter. And definitely without investing so much into that, Flutter wouldn't be as convenient as it is right now. So many people would say this is like a really good approach for building POCs, MVPs, stuff like that, where you just use existing components, but at the same time, because UI framework is open source and easy to adapt, it also opens up possibilities to build design systems, to build your own custom components. And Flutter comes with like 2, I would say, basic libraries. One is Material, the other is Cupertino. Cupertino, I think, shouldn't be a part of Flutter itself. It should be just a package that people can use, because This is one of the drawbacks of Flutter. It may have some gaps in fidelity. You have to be aware of the fact that if you want to build an app that looks like a Swift UI app, it will not look like a Swift UI app. Like just basically because the Apple has advantage of using sometimes hidden APIs, private APIs, or having ability to provide custom shaders with system. Things like that, they just make, they give advantage to Swift UI. So if you're looking for app that looks like any of the Apple built apps, then Flutter may not be the best choice. But at the same time, if you're looking for custom design language, if you're looking for things that stand out of the crowd, then you have control over every pixel in the app. And moreover, if you're looking for something more graphically intensive and you look for ability to have custom shaders, which has become a norm right now in Flutter apps, you can use shaders to render fancy animations, effects, gradients, ripples and stuff like that. And this is a really cool area of where Flutter shines, especially if you're looking for building games, not necessarily casual games, like real 2D games, and maybe in the future also 3D. And lastly, part of the developer experience, native platform integration. As mentioned before, it's something that really opens up a lot of possibilities, and you can integrate with platform in, I would say, two ways: plugins or using direct foreign function calls to libraries, the native libraries. So if you use plugins, you have access, you have like a messaging bus between Flutter and a native platform. So you send messages back and forth. These messages can contain some data. But of course, there is some limitation to that. Like you can only send primitive types unless you implement your own codecs, which is kind of cool because if you only want to send some binary data, you will not convert it to base 64. You will implement your own codec. But if you want to just send simple callbacks or get some stream of data from the native platform like we do when we scan for the Bluetooth devices, we just want to get like the IDs of the devices and maybe their names, which primitives are just fine for that. Whereas like if you are looking for maybe consuming some native libraries that your company has developed, and I bet in such a big company as OLX, you may have a lot of libraries. I've just learned that like you may have like Kotlin libraries, and you can interop with them by just directly invoking them from Dart, which is an amazing possibility. Like I personally used FFmpeg this way so that I could just invoke functions on a FFmpeg library. But you can also maybe modify PDFs, maybe work with databases or encryption and stuff like that. SQLite, for instance, works with directly invoking C functions. And of course, really important part, platform views. And I've spent a lot of time using platform views or even working with platform views. So for instance, last year I even gave like a series of talks about platform views, and this is a thing that, oh wow, I think it's maybe time up. And if you are looking into embedding like native views, let's say a PDF view or a video preview, it's possible, although it has some limitations, especially on iOS. And there is so many very smart people working on making this even more performant than it is right now. But definitely there's like still some work to be done. But if you have some custom components that you would like to use in your Flutter app, it's possible. You can render them easily. You can render them in lists like ads, or you can render them in like full screen, like a camera preview. We've done a thing in the past where it was not a platform view per se, but we had like a Kotlin module that was a video editor that was embedded in a Flutter app, which is also like a possibility. And there's so much more things that you can talk through. Like each of these topics that I mentioned could be its own talk, right? And of course, I only scratched the surface, but I hope that you can see the enjoyment that I have whenever I mention any of these topics, and I could talk about them for long minutes. At the same time, I hope that this just sparked a little bit of interest in you if you haven't tried Flutter before. And there's like things like so many, like there's like things like web support, things like text editing controller, how to operate on paragraphs and stuff like that, deep links, accessibility, and so many more things. Recently, a Flutter team introduced a new graphics engine called Impeller, which is still like a thing that could fill many, many talks to discuss. And at the same time, I know that a short talk like this is not going to explain all of that. So what I recommend you to do is just to try out to start from your own point of view. If you're iOS developer, there's amazing resources about it. If you're Android developer as well, and they will just guide you through steps how to take your experiences as a native developer or a web developer and use them with Flutter. And I often say this, that one of the best, if not the best way to start with Flutter is to have like some prior experience with any other technology, especially mobile technology. Even if you work with Symbian, or even if you work with J2ME or something like that, you will find things that are common between Flutter and your prior technology. And I've met so many folks that have migrated from their prior technology to Flutter, and they don't look back. That's going to be all for tonight from me. Thank you so much for spending time with me. And I'm looking forward to chats with you. Feel free to just approach me here if you're looking for some more Flutter insight. I left you some Flutter stickers here. And if you are looking for decorating your computer or cupboard, feel free to grab them. And also, often I ask about feedback after my presentation. So if you have any words, kind of nod, please feel free to share them via this QR code. Thank you so much. I don't think we have much time for questions right now, but it's going to be all. Thank you so much.
Okay, I think we have some. For a second. Yeah, all good. Cool. So, Dominik, thanks a lot. That was quite something.
Thank you so much.
Before we go into questions from the audience, you had a question to OLX, actually, whether we use Flutter or not, right?
Yeah.
So the interesting thing is that we don't use it yet, but we are about to build a new app from scratch for real estates in Flutter. And by the way, Flutter is not the only tech that we are using. We are also going to experiment with Kotlin multi-platform.
Yeah.
Yeah, so...
Audio tech is not my thing, yeah, I know.
Yeah. So, if anyone is interested, maybe next time we will have also the someone who will talk about Kotlin as well.
Yeah, let's do a
as
match.
I guess main opponent, but from the same company, right? Because
yeah, there is a lot of discussion about KMM versus Flutter, and the thing that I look at this from the point of view that these have a little bit different use case.
audience, so yeah, any questions from you?
Any doubts, any questions, any remarks or jokes?
Forgot one. What annoys you in Flutter the most?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that annoy me. It's like there's a couple of things that grind my gear. It's like things like this fidelity that I mentioned. On iOS, like if your client comes to you and asks you, I used to work as a freelancer. They ask you to have this like a blur like the iOS apps have, or like the settings page or anything like that. It's possible to do, but at the same time, it's just you're fighting against that. Or like, I'm not sure who's going to have a talk about text editing control, like text.
Yeah, that will be the last talk, without the spoilers, but Marcin.
Yeah,
Marcin will be the
I
guy.
haven't met him yet. But like editing text on iOS, there is just a little bit of fidelity gap between what SwiftUI or like UIKit provides and Flutter. So this is like a thing that annoys me. They work on that, and they get like the folks at the Flutter team, they accept feedback very well. So this is really cool. But at the same time, as with many technologies, there's like just some opinionated choices that Flutter team has made, that personally I just feel could be revisited.
Okay, anyone else?
I have a blog post about it.
There is one anonymous. What do you think about hybrid approach, mixing Flutter and native code? Go, John.
Go, John. Thank you, Go, John. Go, John. So we do that, and you can mix and match Flutter and native code easily. One of the actually Poznan-based apps, Fitatu, and it's not a open knowledge, so I'm not sure. But you can see that in their app. You can open their app and see that parts of the screens are, I think, some hybrid approach like Cordova or Ionic. Parts of the app are Flutter, and they cooperate easily. And of course, this is all native code. They have a lot of native code, for instance, to integrate probably with wearables and stuff like that. So you can see products like that even in our market. And as I mentioned, you can combine the native and Flutter code quite easily with many different ways. You can pass data from Flutter to native and vice versa, both using primitives, both using special codecs or directly invoking things. So it's possible, it's doable, and having this prior native experience is definitely what makes it even easier to achieve.
Okay, one more. Okay, the last one. So you got to be good.
Okay, what do you think about the tests in the Flutter? They are mature, or the Google have to work them?
So depending on which kind of tests you mean,
I mean about integration.
Integration, yeah. So we use Maestro for our testing. So we are basically using native tools for writing tests. And I believe that this is like just the best approach, running like just a native app and testing this way end to end. But of course, there's many tools that try to abstract away the native platform and run like Flutter headlessly, like the integration tests from Flutter. But these are more useful, I think, for smaller interactions. These will not be integration tests in a sense, end-to-end tests. I think the name is kind of misleading. It's more like widget tests on steroids, and widget tests itself are mostly for small things. You will not test entire app with that. So I would just recommend use what's like an industry standard, which is just like native toolkits for testing. Like in my case, I'm using Maestro, and I'm super happy with that.
I will have one more question, but wait.
Sure. So no worries. We will have the time at the end to ask questions to all of the speakers. So yeah, if you have questions, no worries. We will try to answer them. Thanks a lot, Dominik.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to chats. Yeah, looking forward to chats, and I hope that you enjoyed, and you're gonna have a great time with the next presentations. Thank you so much.
Okay. We have a next speaker that actually comes from OLX. I mean, he comes from many places actually, because he has 18 years of experience. So I have something noted that it was Booking.com and Motorola. So quite a names in the industry. But he's been working as an iOS engineer at OLX for 2 years now, I believe. So please welcome Jonathan Unsworth.
And ideally, theming based around design systems, and in particular, we have the Nexus Design System. And ultimately, also, the collaboration that's happened at OLX to bring such an initiative together, in the sense that, you know, we're able to take a digital solution, automate the process of actually theming that digital product. And the teams here together have really gone through such a, how can I put it, a beautiful long journey to actually achieve this. Backwards, forwards, forwards. Great, sorry. So yeah, let's take a look at the agenda today. We're going to take a look at the OLX use case. which I think is quite special in the industry. It has a huge portfolio of products, as we all know. Let's identify the problem. Let's take a look at the problems that we've seen here at OLX. And obviously, let's take a look at what a design system is very briefly. It's kind of what the whole solution is based around. And we'll take a look at the architectural solution, you know, what the developers and the designers put together. We'll take a look at that in some detail, get some code snippets, and ultimately look at a little demo. So as we all know, we've got OLX. It's a classifieds digital product. It allows you to buy and sell products. And look, that's based in, I think there was previously South Africa, but I think that's been decommissioned. But we've got Brazil, we've got Portugal, Romania. So it's you know, just to name a few, it's pretty global. Same with the rest of our real estate portfolio. We've got Property24 in South Africa, Immo Virtual from Portugal, as we know. We've got Otterdam from Poland. That's it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And we've got Storia from Romania too. So many different domains that we work in. And we've got motors, which I'm sure many of us are quite familiar with. We've got Automotive from Poland. We've got Autovit from Romania and Stand Virtual from Portugal. So, look, we have a massive portfolio. You know, and I think, you know, one of the common problems that we came across was that we're all trying to solve the same problems. It's theming, it's colors, it's fonts. You know, this goes back to, how can I put it, Motorola, Nokia days at the end of the day. These are not new problems, but we found new solutions to these problems at the end of the day. But that comes with experience. You know, you've obviously got to make mistakes to get to the level of experience and maturity that we've put together here. So let's identify some of the problems that we've experienced in OLX. Isolation. A lot of our teams work on many different products in many different domains, but we all work in isolation. How many teams do you know of that you're communicating with in South Africa, within Lisbon, within Poland, Romania, the rest of it, on a daily basis to communicate and collaborate these solutions? So a lot of us work in isolation. Sorry, I'm not quite the public speaker that Dom is. Really beautiful presentation there. So look, predominantly a lot of our design community is made up of designers. A lot of it's predominantly designers. Developers haven't really made a massive contribution over the years towards that community. And it's kind of that collaboration that needs to increase. So, you know, the initiative hasn't just been about, you know, design and architect. It's about collaboration and bringing those two communities of design and development together. So that's also been a very important part of the initiative. So what are the disadvantages when communities aren't talking and you are working in isolation? Namely, code duplication. We've seen that a lot through a lot of our code bases, code duplication. How many times have, you know, you see one product's got a button, the other product's got a button, but they're two different implementations at the end of the day, achieving the same goal. Button has typography, a font, it has a color. No ownership. So we don't see a lot of clear ownership in terms of our frameworks and our libraries. You know, guys come in, they work on a product, they leave. Who knows how that code base, how that piece of code works? You have to read it, and you have to kind of, you know, a bit of a learning curve going on there. No clear ways of working. I think that's one of the important things that I've seen here is, you know, when you're introducing new people to a company, you know, especially whether it be a junior or a senior or whatever, it's nice to have some documentation, have some ways of working so that they can read up on that, and then we start working in the same way. We have no reusable set of components. Not that I've been aware of since I've been working at OLX, have I actually seen a framework that's reusable across products. And if we've got reusable components, developer time is less, developer happiness is happiness. And, you know, there's a knock-on effect. Same with designers, same with product owners. Hey, you can do this quicker, so great, you know. They know what speed you can work at. Consistency. I think that's one of the important things. There's no consistency. If there's no consistency, that means there's an inconsistent user experience. I think that's very important. I mean, that's ultimately what we're all trying to achieve, whether you product, you design, or even if you're development, you want to generate consistency for your user at the end of the day. And ultimately, with all those things in mind, you don't have clear alignment between your teams. You know, and I mean, this isn't a single person or a single department problem. It's something that we have to solve as a community and come together. And that's one of the important things, coming together to solve these problems, to obviously have better consistency, better user experience. So let's find a solution. I think that's what we're really trying to achieve, and that's what we tried to achieve. That's when I first got involved. I wanted to find a solution, you know, not just having years of experience, but finding a solution for the company and the place that I work with and my colleagues that I work with on a daily basis, make our lives easier. So improve collaboration. It's probably the most important thing. Get people talking. Just get people together in a room, let's talk, let's solve. That's one of the most important things. Without communication, you're not going to solve problems. Clear ownership, we need clear ownership. So we've got RFCs, we've got ADRs in the community. Generate the RFCs to help you build, know about your ways of working. Get the comments back from the community. Clear ways of working, same as before, you know, generate your RFCs, your ADRs, get the communities involved, generate that so you have a general consensus at the end of the day. Apart from the theming part, very important, reusable set of components. A button's a button. Button render, text render, you know. If you have these things that are reusable, you're going to have consistency throughout your systems at the end of the day. So generate consistency with your reusable components. So finding a custom solution. We found a custom solution that's automated. You know, and having an automated solution is really key. It takes out the laborious tasks. Who wants to write in a new font every time? Who wants to write in a new color that you need to put in from the design system? It's laborious. It's a boring task. Who wants to do that? You want to play with the components at the end of the day. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about a design system. And I think it's important, you know, that, you know, I don't know design systems in depth, but I've taken the problems and adapted my thoughts to the areas that I feel are important. So, like I say, I'm coming from the experience that I've generated in terms of my journey. So, what is a design system? A design system is a set of standards to manage design at scale by reducing redundancy while creating a shared language and visual consistency across different pages and channels. And I think that's also very important, a shared language. It's a language that we all communicate in the same way. And how do we do that? We use design tokens. So a design token actually formulates the language that you use in C. So what is a design token? Design tokens are all the values needed to construct and maintain a design system. You'll see design tokens throughout the presentation, very important. Those of you who have worked with design systems, be it a designer or a developer, you know that a design system is how you reference a particular component. So, what are the key elements of a design system? Is a repository. And a repository can take on many forms, but more often than not, you're going to see a style guide and you're going to see a component library. And those are the two areas that we've focused on. Their design systems are far more than my simplistic documentation here. But these are the two areas from a development perspective and a design perspective, you know, that we actually get out to the user, that the user sees. So that was important that we focus on these two areas. So we have a style guide. And a style guide, in theory or in general, is basically a set of principles that are documented. You know, and you document these principles, and everybody works with them and adheres to them. And generally, you're talking about principles and guidelines around typography, color, shadows, be it a gradient, an animation, a unit, A unit is something like a spacing, a width, something like that. And some people, I think a lot of people to begin with, sometimes find this a little bit trivial, but do the work. If you're doing code duplication, you're doing all those things, these elements don't become trivial. But once you get it into an automated setup and you actually apply design and, say, development together with an architectural approach, it becomes very trivial to use your components at the end of the day. So ultimately, all these foundational elements from the style guide, topography, color, shadow, unit, the idea is to bring them together to generate a theme. That's the most important part, is we want to get a theme. With the theme, we can take a UI element, we can take a button, and we can just apply a color, we can apply a font at the end of the day. But as I've mentioned, and as we know, to manually put in a new font, manually put in this, it's a very boring task. And we all want to have fun with the jobs that we do. And we can have fun if you have a little bit of discipline. So ultimately, our end goal is that theme. It's that theme that allows us to inject into a UI component, inject into reusable components in any view that you would like. So more on design tokens. Currently, if you take a look at this slide over here, this is kind of how the designers at OLX are bringing together their various elements. And here we have colors. And as we can see, example, tokens, global, background, brand primary. So your background brand primary would be your design token. That's how you reference that particular color, which has been applied to that particular component at the moment. Those tokens are very important to us, and I'll explain why in a moment. So, architectural solution. As mentioned, the idea is to automate it. Let's take out the boring tasks, and let's put the fun back into what we do. That's kind of the approach, it's kind of the idea that we had. So here's a little bit of the system overflow. Currently, the designers are using Figma. They were using Zeppelin and other tools at the end of the day, but they started to use Figma. Figma gave us a very cool opportunity. We could plug into the Figma API. We could then build a token extractor. That token extractor generates a JSON file. We then get the token generator. If you take a look in green, we've got the Nexus frameworks for each of our platforms. For example, Android Nexus framework, iOS Nexus framework, a Flutter Nexus framework, and a front-end Nexus framework. i.e. web, sorry, for those of you that don't know front-end, it's web-based. And then obviously your apps, be it OLX, motors, real estate, et cetera, will consume those frameworks and make use of it. Now, the one thing that brings all these platforms together is what? Your JSON contract. If your JSON contract remains the same, each platform is consuming that same JSON contract, you speak in the same language at the end of the day. And that's important. And don't get me wrong, I mean, it is possible to change the contract for another platform, but what does that mean? Maintainability. You're going to have to maintain something else somewhere. You know, and I think that's also key. If any of us developers have got a little bit of experience and understanding, maintainability is very important. It's difficult to maintain just even a piece of code sometimes, just a one-line piece of code can be, you know, it's just not even the fact of writing the code, it's what it takes to get there to make that change. And then obviously, as mentioned, the client apps will consume. One more note, we've got the auto-generator of the design tokens. So the design tokens are auto-generated in the Nexus framework layer. So all those tokens are auto-generated. We'll see that in a moment. So the token extractor. Very cool, written in Kotlin. So the guys wrote that in Kotlin. Very cool little initiative. Simply connects into the Figma API, extracts all those tokens out of it, and basically then generates the JSON contract, makes that available. You can make that available in your CI, content delivery systems, anything like that. It's simply a JSON file. How you distribute it It's just a means to the ends, that part. So that part's pretty relatively easy. So this is the output. If you take a look there, we've got your sample design token name. We've just prefixed it. In terms of parsing, it helps you to prefix things. That's quite elementary and simple, that part. This particular example is a color. If you notice, it's light and dark ready. So all our contracts are light and dark mode ready. And from a mobile perspective, it's quite important that today in users' life, you know. I know some people might not think so, but I love my dark mode, you know. So our contracts are light and dark mode ready. I think that took the OLX web community by storm, actually. So the token generator, pretty cool stuff. Very simple stuff, especially from the Swift Gen and the Swift part. Kotlin Poet, I wasn't directly involved in the actual code and in terms of the code writing there, but on Android we use Kotlin Poet to generate the tokens, and namely the accessor tokens. This is what you're going to use through your code base. You know, it's boring to generate it. We use Swift Gen as well. That allows us to generate our foundations within the applications. And I think in terms of Swift and the iOS, we're maintaining 129 lines of code. That's not a lot of code. There's a lot of third-party frameworks that help you do this job. You know, but sometimes these third-party frameworks, they take time to configure. You need to learn that. What's their output? Just doing that learning curve is a mission. We've got 129 lines of code to maintain. That's nothing. Pretty cool stuff, that. Yeah, so ultimately, once we do the generation, we have all our foundations. So once we have our foundations, that's our colors, that's our fonts, that's our units. All those foundational layer elements have now been parsed and generated into code for us, which makes it easy for us to work with. And we build a theme. That theme gets injected. At the same time while we're generating, we did something else at the end of the day that I thought was pretty cool. So with every design system, you have iconography, icons. Everybody has a pack of icons. How boring is it? All the time, designer makes a change with an icon. You as a developer got to run around and go fetch that thing, you know. It might seem trivial, but it gets sometimes people's energies flaring, you know. And we've taken all of that energy out and we've turned it into a positive here. So at the same time, we've approached the designers and they make a pack of icons. We take that pack of icons, we extract that, and we also generate the code for that. So it's easy to use through your code base. You don't have to go add a new one manually. If a designer adds it, they just press a button, generates all the code for you, and it's done. And a lot of this is maintained through CI/CD. So obviously, we can run it on the CI. We've also got a Swift Gen plugin on the Swift side. So you have a plugin at the end of the day, it just generates it automatically for you in the background. You don't have to do anything. You just have to use the frameworks. So let's have a look at the architecture of the foundations. So namely, we have a theme at the top there. It has some fields in there. It has some accesses. These are your font, your color accesses, your unit accesses, things like that. This is what we as developers use to access these particular components, fields, and elements, so to speak. You'll notice as well that we have font, color, unit, and shadow. And you know, my hope is that you can see how closely this architecture actually simply just resembles what the foundational layer is. You know, I don't know about everyone else, but when I started out as a developer, your lecturer teaches you how to build a car with components and all the little pieces into it, you know, as from an object of, should we say, C++ level. It's the same thing. You've taken a theme, you've taken your fonts. What are the various elements that make up a font? And that's what we've done. So it's very simple. This is not complicated or rocket science at the end of the day. We took a very simple approach to this problem. I thought it'd be important to go through a component, and that's as simple as it is. We take the theme, you inject the whole theme into the component. I remember the old days when I first started doing theming and that. You would basically make a component, you'd have 3 or 4 colors, 3 or 4 different fonts, and each one would be a parameter in the component. You know, and 2 months later, it's like, hey, can I have a new color, please? And your parameter list would just grow and grow and grow. So why not take the approach that React did and a lot of the declarative frameworks have taken? Just inject the whole theme. Give the component the theme. Let it do what it wants. If a new, requirement comes from product or design, you have the theme there already. You don't have to worry. You just need to apply what you need to do next. And very simple, we allow a component to inherit from a view. Every UI framework has a view, whether it be Android, whether it be Flutter, whether it be Swift. That view in that framework knows how to render itself, knows where to render itself. So we take those properties and automatically consume them. It's very simple. It's honestly as simple as that, you know. So once we have all that in place, we have our theme, we have our foundational layers in, we've done our accessors and generated all our code, it's very simple. Initialize the theme in your product app. Inject the theme, use the design tokens, use your icons. It's simple, and that's the approach that we've taken. And I think Uncle Bob would be proud. So let's take a look at some code snippets. Boring for some, exciting for others. So how do we initialize a theme? Simple. It's a one-liner. Everything else is abstracted. Everything's abstracted away from the client application. It does everything for you. You choose, I want that theme, you initialize it. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of hard work that's gone into giving you that one line. So these declarative frameworks, they've been very cool. Flutter's got it, Jetpack Composer's got it. It allows you to inject something into your parent, and that injection can filter all the way down to your children. That's pretty cool, you know. It means as a developer, you have this available to you. SwiftUI offers you something very similar approach, something known as environment variables. And what they do is exactly that. They propagate through the view hierarchy and are the perfect solution for propagating our theme. So it's the perfect solution. A little bit like a singleton, if you'd like, you know, but very effective. I think it's very, very effective at the end of the day. Just a little snippet about how Swift does it. Pretty cool. Simply, inherit there from environment key, set up your default values, and away you go. Environment values over there allows you to assign a new value to your default at any time, so that's pretty cool. It means we can easily switch our themes. Injecting a theme. So now that we have an environment variable, what do? We extract that value from the environment. And as you can see, line 34, it's just a component, boom. Your component now has that theme, and away you go and use it. How easy is it to use? Simple. Theme.fonts. .prun regular. I'm not sure there's any design members here or any developers that have used the design system at all, but P1 regular, P2 regular, P3. We've got colors, text global primary there. We've got units over there, units.themespace.value. Very simple, very easy to use. And I mean, that's the idea. We want the fun for the developers, fun for the designers, bring fun back into our job. That's just a snippet of the automated code generation. That's what it does. Everybody who's worked on this kind of stuff knows you've got a long list of values to write. You have to add a new one. It's boring. And I believe we have some demos. So we've got demos for 3 platforms. The idea is we give the developer and the designer the confidence, and that's the most important thing, the confidence, that when a designer in a domain level designs a component, gives that component to the developer, you have it there. There's no going back and, oh, can you put this new field in, and then we need a new merge request, a new Jira ticket for this, a new conversation for this. It's all there, you know, to add a new one. Designer adds it into Figma, press the button, it's all automated, and we have that new value. And we've got the icons. So, as mentioned, we've done this on dark mode. If I'm not mistaken, this is the first framework inside the company that is light and dark mode ready. Yeah, I think that was quite an achievement for all of us. We were quite happy that day. And also, I mean, for me in this presentation and generating exposure for Nexus, I want people to get involved. You know, we're in a large company. I want this framework to be open source. Could be open source, even if it's just open source within the company, but everybody's getting use of it at the end of the day and contributing towards it, you know, and being a part of it. Because it is fun. I tell you this much. Everybody that's been a part of it has had so much putting this together. Especially from a developer's perspective, you know, they've been feeling a little bit more connected to the design community, especially from mobile. Mobile's had a little bit of a side path and side journey within OLX over the years, and we've changed that collaboration where we've got all the platforms and designers working together. Also, what's important to note about design tokens is if you're willing to sit and take the time, you can group them correctly. Grouping your design tokens is also very important, be it foreground colors, background colors, and things like that. So Android, we've also got light and dark mode. Oh, didn't the middle one play? And then last but not least, it's still in its workings. You know, as Kuba's mentioned, the topic of conversation has come up. Flutter is starting to make the rounds inside our company. I think it's a moment for all native developers and anybody who is a mobile tech-savvy person to experiment and play. That's what we do. That's what we're here to do at the end of the day. So me personally, I decided to take this architecture as it sits, as it stands, and as we've seen, especially the foundational layers that you've seen, and I put it into Flutter. And I've given it a little bit of a bells and whistles in terms of architecture. Very baby demo. It's just light and dark mode ready. The tokens, as you can see, are being printed out at the end of the day. If we switch back there, we've got light and dark mode. We go back, we go forwards. As you can see, we have the foundational layers in place. For me, that is a big thing in any, you know, in terms of this architecture, being able to take a contract, pass the contract, and put it into the foundational layers. That's quite a big thing before you even get to your components. So this is in a very good space. I've had a couple of Flutters look at it. Dom, if you get a chance, it'd be great to have a look at the architecture. Give me some pointers, because I'm new to Flutter. If I'm not mistaken, that's the last slide. I'm not sure if anybody's got any questions, but I'm around. Dom, please, yeah. I'll get, sorry, yeah.
Thanks for the great presentation. I can imagine this has been a standing work and a lot of moving pieces to just make it work across the company. One obvious thing that pops up is how are you going to approach components? Are you going to code generate components from the design system? Okay. Or are you just going to focus on topics?
we're not generating the components just yet, because you can do that in Figma, if I'm not mistaken. You can actually generate the components one step at a time, please. But don't get me wrong, it is on the list of things that people would like to see. A lot of the devs have come up with, can we auto-generate the components? That would be super cool, but I think we need to investigate that, take a look at the output, and see if it's going to be value to us. But yes, definitely something to research and do.
One thing that I've learned with working with designers is that sometimes in order to generate components from Figma, you first have to teach designers about many different things like layout, because there's not always an easy connection between what designer wants to like put on screen versus what's actually being done.
That very topic that you've mentioned has been a journey, if you can appreciate, you know, and I think
Looking forward
that,
to it, yeah.
me too, but that collaboration journey between designers is important. You know, just because one person's here and one's here, no, you work together to bring each other here. So that's what we've been doing, and we're getting there slowly.
Amazing. Good luck then.
Thank you, thank you. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. Will it ever be fully open source for the public?
That I couldn't tell you. I'm not in a position to make it open source. If you can, I would love to make it open source because it's nothing new. Like I say, this is from Motorola, Nokia Series 60 days. You know, this is theming, you know. It's something that we all have to do in any digital product. You have to put a color. I mean, Slido's got light and dark blue and stuff like that. It's a theme. So for me, it should be open source. I would love to see these kind of frameworks open source at the end of the day. Definitely, I'm right behind you.
Yeah, I've had similar problem in my company that I work with, and yeah, it had a problem that every month we changed logos.
100%, yeah. There are a couple of open source frameworks, but like I mentioned, frameworks can be difficult to work with. I think we all know that, and dependency list grows, you know. For me, I'd rather, we've investigated a number of other frameworks to kind of see that we could work with them. But just to configure them, you have to be a genius sometimes at the end of the day, you know. Any other questions?
We have one on the slide though. How this framework handles removing color and icons. Is there some fallback mechanism?
Ah, I know what you mean. Can I be honest with you? Something's always going to break somewhere. You know, no system is perfect at the end of the day. If you remove a token, so if a designer removes a token, it goes down the daisy chain. The token has to be removed. But don't forget that token is still being used somewhere in the code base. It's going to break. If you guys have got a solution for me, please bring it. You know what I mean? I'll work with you any day. But no system and no architecture is foolproof. Not in my experience anyway. That is something that you would have to manage, you know. Maybe remove the usage first, deprecate the usage before you remove the token, have those kind of subtle approaches. But I would love to see, hey, listen, remove all of this from the code. It's going to be quite a job that, you know. You might even need some reflection running around. Not every framework supports reflection.
Yeah, going back to the question of the open sourcing, right? So would you like to see this open source or not?
I would love to see it open source, personally.
Yeah, I think that's the direction. Might be one of the first things that we'll actually consider open sourcing. But there is more to the design system, right? There is also a whole component library that you might or might have missed from the presentation. It was more about the tokens generation and the architecture actually behind design system. But there is a ton of stuff there that could be open source and that could rival, I guess, material design maybe at some point. Those are big words, but yeah, you know. There's one more. What's the biggest challenge of maintaining your design system?
People. I think at the end of the day, collaboration is key. You know, we've all got opinions. Everybody wants to be a part of something, you know, at the end of the day, and I want to add value. And you need to make these people feel valued, you know what I'm trying to say. So I think for me, the biggest challenge is to try and keep the architecture as organic and whole as possible at the end of the day, but still work with people's input and value that input and work with that, you know. So I think the challenge is sometimes just, you know, having that vision and keeping that vision going before it becomes very diluted one day. Because I think, as we all know, as engineers come, it's easy to sit down, get into your UML diagrams and put together your architecture and go build it, you know what I mean? Then you get other people involved in it. Open source, you know what I mean? You have 20, 30, 40 contributors. People are going to bring a lot to that, you know what I mean? And working with people is going to be your biggest challenge, you know what I mean? Because we're all different, we've all got different energies. And how do you as a person, you know what I mean, who's going to be one of the maintainers of it, work with that? And you have to respect those people. So for me, the biggest challenge has been with people, because plenty of people are involved in this initiative at the moment. Android and iOS has seen some great successes in the various products that we've been using it, and the community. So for me, that's probably one of my biggest challenges.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. I guess that was in terms of the question. Thanks a lot. Great presentation. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Stephen.
Okay. Look, folks. It's time for a small break. There is some food in the bag. There is something in the kitchen, I believe. There are cupcakes, coffee, hopefully something else. I'm not really sure what. Let's call it a surprise. Yeah, 15 minutes, and we will be back for the last presentation of the day. So yeah, get refreshed, and let's be back in 15 minutes, okay? Okay, everyone. I hope the break was good. I saw some of you have beers, so I guess, yeah, it started off good. The last talk of the day. This is the only thing that stands between us and the burgers. So, yeah. Our last speaker, Marcin Krzyzanowski. Marcin is passionate about Swift, open source, and developer productivity, most known for CryptoSwift.io, OnlineSwiftPlayground.com, and SwiftStudio.app, IDE enthusiast. So, Marcin will tell us about harnessing text layout with TextKit 2. Stage is yours.
Thank you. How does it work? Oh, okay. Yeah. Hi. Great. Hi, my name is Marcin Krzyzanowski. How many iOS developers do we have today? Ah, Jesus. How many Android developers do we have today? What is the rest of you? It's a Flutter, right?
Everybody's Flutter now, yeah.
Everybody's Flutter. Okay. Yeah, this is mostly for iOS developers, Mac developers, Apple developers. So let's start it. Oh, sorry. Where do I point it to?
There's like a big button.
Is it me now? My name is Marcin Krzyzanowski. I'm iOS developer, macOS developer. I have some open source contribution. I've been doing different things in the past. I implemented some cryptography, PGP, and then I switched to text, basically. I work at Judo App. That is the design and build tool for SwiftUI apps that write production-ready code, which is connected to the previous talk. It's a great app. I'm very passionate about it. You should now open your MacBooks and download this macOS application. That will skyrocket our App Store ranking and probably will give me a rise. So I appreciate. But today I'm going to talk about text. If I figure out how to do that. Can we switch to the next? Then to the next part. What?
Swing and flick.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work. What?
Now we have it.
Should I hold it like this? To set a tone, we're in the European Union, and I'm talking about a very exciting technology. But you know, Europeans talk about technology a bit different. So if I'm a bit harsh, sorry about that. If I say something is good, it's actually awesome, that's just set the tone for this presentation. And can we do something about it? All right. Great. Can I use a keyboard then? What do I do? Well, the programmers are not good at fixing computers, right? I'm a programmer, like to the bone. I really like to code. And I try to stay as a programmer for the rest of my life. I don't know how do you feel about it, but the life goals of every programmer are like create a text editor or programming language and eventually operating system, because that's the tool we use. We use the programming editor since the beginning. We use the programming tools, programming language, and operating system, and at start it seems to be a black box, and over the time we will learn how to use it, how to build that. So this is also my life goals, and I think I already reached the first point from that, which is the text editor. And the building the text editors is not that easy task. It was with the programmers since the beginning. This is 1981, Paul Lutus, awesome guy. He implemented the Applewrite, which was the first word editor on Apple II. He sold millions of that. He sold it to Apple, become rich. That was the bar in 1981 for the text editors. If you're interested in the story of the Paul Lutus, the co-recursive podcast with the remote developer episode, I really highly recommend to listen. Really, really good history of computing. But that was the bar of the editors in 1981, and as we know, it changed a little bit. So today, look a bit more like that, and me having a dream to build a programming editor, I come up with the idea to build the IDE. And the ongoing project, Swift Studio, is the IDE that I tried to build for several years already. This is actual screenshot from the product. But at one moment in the developing, I stopped because I wasn't happy with the editor. This one rectangle that is in the middle. It bugs me. I couldn't get the performance. I couldn't get the flexibility just using the components that Apple gives me with the app kit. So I said, okay, maybe I should build my own editor and I would be happy. So I started building a text layout system and spent several months just building the layout system on top of Cortex. The Cortex, like on Apple API level, is the lowest level when you play with the text and fonts. And while I was building this layout system, that turns out to be not that easy task. It's easy to get to have something, and then it's really, really hard to make it correct. And what happened was WWDC 21, when Apple announced TextKit 2 as a replacement of TextKit 1. And we can recap. There was the presentation about the TextKit 2, and where they outline the whole API and the technology behind. So there was the whole documentation at the time. I don't know if you have a voice here. I found it interesting because there's a guy who listened to that session, and he was like 5 minutes in, and he was like, yeah, there's no voice. But he was like 5 minutes in, said, okay, that's too low level. Like, just skip it. I'm not gonna make notes of that. It's too low level. Maybe if you want to build a text editor, which is exactly what I wanted to do. So I watched it all. The output of this presentation was that TextKit 1 is dead and TextKit 2 is the future. So TextKit 1 is a layer on top of Cortex. It was with us for like 15 years. I don't know, since the beginning of the Mac OS X back then, OS X. And worked well, but it had problems, especially with the Japanese script, some Hindu scripts. Like there were problems that was unable to overcome. And the performance also was not the greatest. So Apple came up with this rewrite and said, okay, now we have a TextKit 2. That one going to be better. The next year, they had another session when they said, okay, we'll fix some bugs, and now it's even better. The TextKit 2 now is available on macOS and iOS. And everyone can use it. So everyone obviously started to use it, because why not? And they ask, what will you gonna create with TextKit 2. Of course, nobody gonna create anything with TextKit 2 because that's not that obvious what to do. Do you know what to do? Like how to start with TextKit at all? Like, you know, TextKit is this framework to lay out text. There's one component though, what you want, which is UI text view, right? It uses the TextKit under the hood. Start with the design of the TextKit 2. Content, which is the storage that yields the text elements. Text element, this is all abstract. So they went abstract, they build the API that's the most abstract possible. Some content manager that provide multiple text element out of some storage that you have. Then the layout engine. The layout engine takes this text element and take the frame, layout letters, and produce layout fragments. Right? So we have a fragment that has a position, size. And third element, viewport layout controller, which is responsible to actually display and draw the layout fragment wherever. UI view, NS view, CA layer. You probably can use Dart or Flutter to as an output of the text view. That's on that level of abstraction they work. Start with the content management. Look a little bit closer. So it's abstract. It's a class. The only interesting property here is element range, which means which fragment of your content, your file, this element covers. And they say it's abstract, but it's not really abstract. The actual abstract is NSText paragraph. If you try to use NSText element, it's pretty useless because one thing is missing. It does not provide any string, any text, right? So it's not really that reusable. Everywhere, everyone, including Apple, use NSText paragraph as a base class that has an attributed string that actually deliver the string to work with. Then we have a provider. Provider create this layouts, layout fragments that has a sub views, which are the lines. So the fragment is rectangle. If you wrap the text, there are multiple lines, and each line is this line that is visible line. It's a logical line. It's a frame, bounds, that kind of properties. And the third element, which is a viewport, that one was a big announcement. So the viewport is here to solve the performance issue, and the promise is that the viewport will only lay out the text that is visible, like in the visible rectangle, not the whole text at once. And that will give a bump in the performance. So for example, while you scroll, it only lay out this part of the text, skipping what is above and below. On top of that, the layout itself can be moved in the background to the background queue. Everything is all the API. There's no async like Swift async. Once you specify the layout queue, the fragment become asynchronous. There's a state that says the size is estimate, the size is ready, the layout is ready. You have to observe that state and update this view on the screen accordingly. Also, the text line fragments are updating. This is KVO, which means all this possible observation mechanism on Apple platforms, key value observation, I think. How to customize? Like that was an overview of the design. How to customize those elements? They all have a delegates, all good delegates pattern. Text content manager has a delegate with two methods. One, when you can specify text element. So it is custom text paragraph. I say whatever you need, you can return that element with some additional properties. And the other one, it's just said whether this element should be enumerated or not, which effectively means should be hidden or not. And that is all on the content. So the content that push what is on the storage. On the layout side, well, it's just one. Layout manager delegate, when you return customized fragments. The fragment has a frame, bounds, but it may have any decoration you need. I use here, I have a flag, show invisible characters. So I pass some flag to this layout element. Then I later use in a drawing. Layout fragment has a method draw, and you can put whatever you want in that method. By default, it draws the string, the attributed string, but you can override that with your whatever you want. Especially, you can add some decoration. It's not visible that well, but there's a blinking dots between the characters, which I use as to present the invisible characters. So I draw it as an addition to the text. And the viewport, well, the viewport is not the customizable. It requires to provide some information. First information is bounds. It said how big is the viewport, this rectangle, this visible rectangle. And not that one. How big is the rectangle? And this method to set up on each layer, you can set up the layout fragment additionally. So there's a place to, like, I don't know, move it, whatever you want to do on the layout. And just, so those three elements are like a foundation and everything you need to work with text on the TextKit 2. It's so much simpler than TextKit 1. You know, the text is easy if you think in the terms of left to right and ASCII, or even like a Polish alphabet, but it's getting really hard if you have a mixed left, right, right, left in the same line. If you have some vertical scripts, all of that, it's quite tricky to do right, especially when it comes to selection. So the selection may look like you go from the left, and at some point you have a right to left. So what should happen with the selection? Where you start other, like maybe it jump here and you select that. There are like rules to feel the selection natural for every script. And the NSText selection navigation, which is the class, the method, the class that Apple provide, do all of that for us. So it check the attributed string, and we just say, okay, for this selection, NSText selection, that start at this position, text ranges, and I try to move right by character, by line, by word, and just say that, and it return new selection with new range that is correct for the context. It's a huge time saver. It's really hard to implement that correctly by your own. When it comes to selection, and there's a location, and the location is completely abstract. It's a protocol. This is location. Location is the protocol that has a method compare. It's not even like a comparable, equatable, nothing like that. It's just a text collection. And it is up to the content manager to understand, to provide the implementation that works with that content manager. So the content manager is aware of his own types of text collection. And if you want to move to get the 3 characters to the right or left, you have to go through the text manager that translate the input location, offset by, and it return the new location, which is still abstract, but is known to internals of the content manager, which is so much similar to what's going on in the Swift string, if you're familiar with that. So the Swift string doesn't have a index base like the integer-based indices. It has, you have to use this API that for this string move right by 3, which will yield some new values that are not readable. And the string itself, you know, is it's not easy to work with. You know, Swift string is known, just like Rust, is known for being Unicode correct, and they did some pivot from UTF-16 to UTF-8, but now it's pretty good. So it's easy to make a mistake. I took one character here, which is E with the accent, which consists of 2 Unicode code point. That's the case. And depends how you ask a string about it, it will return a different value. If you ask for the start and index of UTF-16, is 0, is start, 2 is end. Okay, which means there are 2 characters. But visually, it's a 1 character. String.count, which should return how many characters there is, returns 1. Because, well, effectively, that's 1 character. String UTF and 16 count, it's weird because it does not return how many characters is there, it returns how many bytes is there. But for bytes, we have another API, length of bytes, which is different. For UTF-8 is 3, but for UTF-16 is 4, right? There's more. You know that the Swift on Apple platforms bridge to NS-string, which is the old one, which is not UTF-based, but UTF-8-based, but is UTF-16 based. That means it applies different rules. So if we have a string that is NS-string and length is 2 for some reason, the length of bytes is the same. But now we can ask the same string, depends on, as a string, a Swift string or NS string for the composed character sequence, which is this Unicode idea of that exactly character, which you may compose 1 character with some accent that will create 1 character, and you get a different result. So range at the top, NS string will say length is 2, but at the bottom, if you get the distance from beginning and end of the range is 1. Which kinda play well with the string count. I don't know which one is correct. Whether it should be 1 or 2, I don't know. Like, the problem is the TextKit 2 is Objective-C framework. It was shipped 3 years ago, but it's not Swift, it's Objective-C. Under the hood, it uses NS string, it uses UTF-16, it uses NS attributed string. If you today use it with string, be careful, because when you do any calculation on the range, it's very easy to just make that mistake that you will move by 1 character like too far or not. Because you have to, well, if you start with a Swift string, you have to translate it to NS string and then do the calculations. On top of that, that results in NS text location that is abstract that we have to convert to string index if we work with the index because we have like some storage that we then, well, have to convert to NS string index, which is integer based, to NS range from the world of UI kit, or NSString, to NSText range, which is new, and that one is different than NSRange. NSText range is TextKit range, eventually to Swift range. And all of that happens when you work with TextKit 2. That's the mostly problem of Swift, not the framework itself. If we choose to not use Swift, well, that would be much easier, because that would be just NSString everywhere, and everything is compatible, and it's easier to build. When I work with those, I have helpers that translate one range to another range. Otherwise, yeah, there's a lot of boilerplate. And translating the range is basically every time asking the content manager for the offset between the locations that only the content manager is aware of. And on the other way around. So that was theory. Now, when it comes to practice, well, most of the time you're going to use UI text view, NS text view. UI text view on iOS, NS text view on macOS. And how Apple built that is that UI text view works simultaneously with the TextKit 1 and TextKit 2, and it can switch one to another. That is because some of the features that we are familiar with from the UI text view are just not possible to implement in this new framework. So they switch back to the old framework, relayout, and provide this old functionality. That's a lot of problem because of that, and a lot of confusion. Normally, if you want to decide what to use, there's this initializer on the UI text view. Using text layer manager, true means, okay, set up with TextKit 2, false, set up with TextKit 1. What happens if you go with the TextKit 2? Well, there are other components normally works with the text view, NS text container. That's the old one. It defines the frame of the shape of the storage of the content of the text. And I crossed out the methods that are not relevant anymore. If you have to know in which mode you are. So if you're in a TextKit 2, none of this makes sense. Especially the line fragment rect, which is now somewhere else. It's in the layout manager. So that might be like a surprise, because you have old code, you have some logic here, and it just stopped working, and you don't know why. So you have to learn that, okay, that is not even called anymore. The same with text view has, NS text view at least, has a method to draw the insertion point that are not called if you in a TextKit 2 mode, but are called if you TextKit 1 in a TextKit 1 mode, which means if you have a custom insertion point drawing implemented, well, it's not going to work, right? Of course, documentation not going to tell you which one works or not. You have to like find it out, which really not helping. On top of that, the text view uses do not use the NS Content Manager, which was the base in a design. It uses NS Text Content Storage, which inherits from the Content Manager, but something went wrong. So the presentation crashed on the web. Yeah, so it's here. All right, so the The NSText view. Yeah. Is it? No. No, it's corporation, OLX. Come on. What internet do you have here?
Internet problem.
It's
Apple problem.
Apple problem. Well, I have it offline. If I could just switch. Możemy to otworzyć na Keynote? Pewnie tak. All right. So NSText content storage is the old good one, NSText storage, which means the whole abstraction that we just built is destroyed because default text view components fall back, like by default, use NSText storage. And NSText storage, what is NSText storage? NSText storage is it inherits from NS attributed string. And it has problems that it's in memory storage. It is NS attributed string that can be slow sometimes. And it has a huge performance penalty when subclassed from Swift. And that's bad. But what happens if you want to use a custom content provider? Because why not? We have this abstraction. Well, I asked, and there was no answer. But it doesn't work because NSText view, UI text view, at some point asks for text storage, NSText storage. Like it's expect this property, and the application crashed. Which was like, at that point, I knew that I'm not going to use NSText view for my editor because I don't want to use NSText storage. I just want to build my new content provider, which eventually will have some capabilities that NSText storage cannot give you, especially memory-wise. This abstracted API that they designed, it's really good design, but the implementation is so-so. There's a lot of assumptions that we work with the specific types, not with the protocols, not with the architecture, the API that was built. Again, NSText paragraph. If you subclass NSText element, which is like by design supposed to be, you subclass NSText element and call it line element and return that to the layout manager, it will crash because it expects NSText paragraph with the attributed string property. It's on the Objective-C level, so it will compile, but will just crash in the runtime. Therefore, the actual base is NSText paragraph, which is not great, because paragraph is not the greatest base model. Like, if you want to have a line, what do? Well, the paragraph is not it's not a line. It's not exactly a line. Like the Unicode specify paragraph break character, which mean it may look, there's text, there's some space, more text. But you think about line, that should be this one. This is one element, that's another one, right? So it's not really convenient to work with the NSText paragraph as a base. Even worse, if you actually want to be on this abstract API and extract the string from the content manager. Well, that's not even the full code. This is just a part of the code. How do you get? So you enumerate all the text elements. The text element has some range. You have to find the beginning of the range you ask for in that range. Your range might span through multiple elements, so you have to track these locations and eventually like add all the pieces, and that will give you a string. There's a lot of code to do. Well, it's easier if you assume that there's text storage, right? Because if that would be text storage, I would just dot text storage and use the alt API, would be substring of attributed string. So yeah, the alternative to using this API that it gives us is, well, don't use it, and maybe use some other way to access the buffer with the string, which is probably the more performant, but impossible if you want to build a reusable component. Another thing, non-continuous layout. Non-continuous layout is the thing if you start here and you move to the bottom, it will know that there's a gap and will just lay out the bottom. Enabled by default on the TextKit 2, disabled on TextKit 1, and in theory it looks like this. So we just moved, and very quickly it just rendered this part layout, this part. What actually happened? It works with. So there was a case. A friend of mine, he made performance tests between TextKit 1 and TextKit 2, and that was the case. But why this jump is so slow on TextKit 2? And I started to debug, and turns out it's fast if you use NS text view, UI text view, but not if you use anything else, so custom UI view. Why it's so? Well, I reached to disassembler and I check what the layout method does, and it calls this method's location for position in view. Then I search for the private APIs that are available on the GitHub, and in fact, they use the private protocols that the UI text view implement and provide some data to UI layout controller, which I cannot do, because this is private. I'm unable to conform. In fact, NX text view implement this private protocol that is then used during the layout. And it happens like this. So it asks the NSText view for the location for position, and it can quickly lay out this part of text. Without this piece, it starts here and try to lay out everything until it reached that point, which takes seconds, for I don't know, 500 lines. At this point, there's no workaround for that. Maybe they're gonna make public this API. I don't know. It looks like Apple just implemented this great cathedral, the great design, and implemented that in a very specific way that, well, broke the whole design. That was not the point, basically, of this remake, because not only they can they benefit of performance gains. There's more problems. While I was working on the text view, custom text view element, I reported multiple bugs. Some of them may be resolved. I don't know, because they do not really respond. But I had to implement workaround for all of that. One was really bad, like replace content, which was is documented, but is not part of the public API, which was weird, right? So it's documented, but it's not there. And the other one was once they add it, it actually didn't work. so I had to implement that by myself. There's more. Sometimes it's assert, and as you assert, sometimes it just doesn't draw anything. So selection is work on some positions. Range is wrongly documented. That kind of stuff that unfortunately we can learn only by trying, because documentation, the whole documentation is just those 2 videos that I shown on the beginning. And they still ask us to show what we gonna create with the TextKit 2, which I really try to. The result, I've built actually this text editor with the TextKit 2. This is the current state of it. And I'm pretty happy with that. And I think that will be the point when I back to Swift Studio and try to implement the other features, because I'm quite happy with the text editor, and I can check up the implementing the text editor for my life goals. Only 2 remains. So to recap, TextKit 1 is dead. It's just there's no point to use it in new projects. TextKit 2, still work in progress. 3 years in public, maybe 2 more. I don't know. TextKit is like high-level API. The generic design is good. I really like this design. The implementation is so-so. And the UI TextView is a reference implementation. So the Apple used that one, nothing else, to use the TextKit 2. If you're interested in all the quirks of the TextKit 2, there's a project as the TextView where I push the limits of the TextKit 2. There's a lot of comments. You can play with it. You can use it as your own component to whatever you want. Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions? I have some stickers and pins for the Swift Studio, unreleased, but I have it. So if anyone is interested, it is good. It goes to the laptop. It's very good.
Yeah. Thanks for the presentation. It was quite something, and I think everyone can tell that you are really passionate about text. And text editors, I guess, especially. Some people have life goals of, planting the tree, building family, etc. And you did with text editor, programming language, and operating systems.
I believe that's the phase.
That's the passion. Yeah. Okay, folks, we have room for one question from the audience. Go ahead.
So I won't bore you with 4 different questions that I collected during your presentation. But one thing for the text editor in a IDE popped to my mind, which is multiple current locations.
That's a good question.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
is it possible with TextKit 2 or?
It is possible, but it's not they do not make life easy. I implemented that, but I have one function is this long to work around the bug that happens somewhere, and I have to fix things. It is possible, so you may have multiple carrots, multiple selections. You have to maintain them by your own, and it gets in a way, but it's possible.
Okay, that was quick. So maybe really quick another one, but from someone else.
Yeah.
I guess no one else has a question. So thanks a lot. One more time, that was really great presentation. And now it's a time for a general Q&A. If you have any questions about what OLX does or how we approach actually I said Flutter, I said Kotlin multi-platform, but we also do obviously native iOS and Android as well. And we do, a ton of different stuff actually. So I can tell you more about it if you are interested. And apparently, if you will ask questions, you will be rewarded with points to promote your offers on OLX platforms. And I promise that at some point this will be a cryptocurrency. So just hold it, okay? Any questions from the audience? I mean, you are my favorite guy here, definitely.
I have a question because we
Sure.
had like a really nice talk about design system.
Yeah.
And I think in companies like OLX, like huge corporations, there's probably some discussion around making like a multi-app, like an app that covers all the services that the company provides. Like probably Uber does this and other big companies. And I wonder if you have like considered kind of combining all the things that OLX does on different markets into a single multi-app.
Yeah. So the question would be actually what OLX does, right? Because OLX is one thing, but then you have Automoto, right? You have Autodom. There is a common denominator for all of them probably, but they also work in their very specific niche, and they require different UX solutions to certain parts. So I believe that in the end, like having one app that solves everything, it's not really a possibility. But I believe that if we have a design system that is a common thing, if we have a shared library that does business logic, for example. So, posting an ad is pretty similar on OLX, pretty similar on Automoto, pretty similar on other portals that we own. So you can abstract this away to a single point, right? And then use it within different apps. So I believe, at this point in the life cycle of the company, that's not the approach we are going for. Although I know that Twitter, X, right? X is going for that under Elon Musk. So yeah, maybe it's something, but for us, we think that our superpower is actually the differentiation between platforms that we have, right? Yeah.
So you don't have any skeleton app that you can then abstract other things out of it.
That's a good question. We don't have it yet. We don't have it yet. We are working on actually building it. So, you hit the nail right in the head, because actually the plan for the Flutter, for the real estate app that I mentioned, is not to build the real estate app itself, but start an ecosystem. And as some of you mentioned, OLX is a big company, right? Hundreds of engineers in the end. And having separate platform/ecosystem teams can give us the speed, right? I mean, it's really hard to move at speed when you're that big. Obviously, there are bigger companies, but they also have more resources. So yeah, at some point, you need to solve common problems with one solution instead of using 5 different solutions. Sometimes it's different solutions are good for innovation, but at some point in many companies they are not really great for speed. So yeah, we will have skeleton or shared library probably, or something to that regard at some point. Hopefully in next 2 years. Being realistic, right? Cool. Anyone else? Do we
get stickers to, like, if you
Oh, yeah,
get a sticker,
that's
then
the-
just go to us and we will just...
That's the cryptocurrency I mentioned, actually.
We will get your email address and then your OLX profile will be...
I mean, for real, we could actually use cryptocurrency and have it on blockchain, also with your questions. Yeah, that's how much your question is worth,
I
basically.
have some stuff to sell, so I will use them.
Yeah. Actually, when you are employed at OLX, you are getting the points for free every, I think, 6 months. Unfortunately, they are not replaceable with money, but I guess we'll work on that. Yeah, go ahead. The one in the back.
Have you tried Kotlin modeling platform in any of your applications?
Another great question. I love those questions because they are practical, right? We actually are about to release something in a couple of weeks to the production. We are past the first stage, which was very introduction. If there is an ability for for us to mix and match the native code base of iOS and Android with Kotlin multi-platform, and how many layers actually we can replace with Kotlin. As it turns out, we can replace about 2.5 layers. So we can have a business logic that is shared, we can have data layer that is shared, maybe networking, and then the only thing that we can't really do with Kotlin multi-platform at the moment is UI, right? So we hope that some parts of OLX app will be able to test drive the Kotlin multi-platform in production in hopefully 6 weeks.
Okay, so are you trying to introduce Jetpack Compose to?
I think we are using Jetpack Compose already, right? So there is, yeah.
Yeah, I talked with Kuba
Yeah.
last week, and he said that they tried Compose for Kotlin.
Yeah. So some components need rewrite, right? There is a mix of an old code base with in different things basically, and this is also one of the problems that. If we write new stuff in Kotlin, that's fine because we write it from scratch. But if you want to move existing parts, then you need to rewrite also the sort of old way of writing the app.
Are you creating separate layouts for iOS and separate for Android, or both applications will have the same design?
The design itself, it's the same. Right, so we don't really use a lot also of the native elements for given platforms. So we have kind of unique design that should be the same across all of the platforms, also web included. And this is the UI layer has to be written natively in the respective languages or platforms. Yeah. Oh, those were really practical questions.
You've mentioned building the Flutter app from scratch. For the OLX.
Yeah, for real estates, right? I'm not sure if I'm not spoiling that one.
Yeah, but
NDA content.
Yeah.
That's probably a big step, but did you try it or considered running some like brownfield approach and putting some Flutter code into existing native app?
I think we did, actually. We had an experiment with Flutter actually within the OLX app.
It has a Flutter library.
Yeah, maybe that's how you know. So the conclusion was that Flutter will be great for building things from scratch, but there is a lot of uncharted waters when you want to have the interoperability. Also, when we did that experiment, I think it was maybe even like almost 2 years ago when we started, maybe a year ago, I'm not really sure. But it wasn't also that clear that Flutter will be the way, right? I think Flutter really gained traction in last 2 years, realistically, and probably last year it was coming to the limelight. So yeah, we tried it with an OLX app. We are trying the Kotlin multi-platform to get the comparison. We decided that from scratch probably Flutter will give us the most benefits. Like you write things once, you get it for all of the platforms. But for the OLX app, it wouldn't be really the case, at least at the time when we are experimenting with it. But since we will be having an ecosystem for Flutter, it kind of puts Flutter ahead of KMM in that regard, right? So we will see what the future will bring. Yeah, you earn your coin. Oh yeah. How do you manage new feature releases? How many of them are using A/B tests? Which platform comes first to production? I will start from the last part, which is which platform comes first to production. Every platform comes almost at the same time. So basically it depends on our capacity. There is no priority for a specific platform. But we all know, I mean, I kind of can guess that everyone here has the mobile phone in their pocket, right? So that's the platform we aim for. That should be the starter. Like the desktop version doesn't have to be the first. The mobile one is including mobile web as well, right? Is how we start things nowadays. And yeah, in terms of the capacity, if we can start on iOS, it will go on iOS. If we can start on Android, it will go on Android. But ultimately we aim for a feature parity so that it doesn't differ between the platforms. Are we using A/B tests? So everything is actually A/B tested. There is no feature right now that is not being A/B tested. We call it experimentation culture. And in the beginning, it wasn't that easy, actually. You need to work out quite a few things. But basically, you can ask yourself a question like, how would you know that the feature you introduced, what kind of an impact it made, right? If you are not tracking it correctly. And A/B tests are probably the way to go in terms of the introducing features. Also, it's actually really easy to roll back certain changes if you had some problems that you didn't code up before because you're just enabling the basic version of the test in that regard. And how do you manage new feature release? Well, this is very specific to each team. Each team has a process of how this exactly goes. But for mobile web and desktop web as well, actually, we have continuous integration, continuous deployment. So actually, features comes there every day, right? There is no like very specific process or release management. They are being deployed, like I guess dozens times a day. For the mobile platforms, it's obviously different, and this goes to the approval process in the App Store, etc. So there is a certain period of time you need to wait before we release something. But yeah, hopefully in the future it will be easier. I think Flutter has some features to push the changes. Yeah, exactly. I mean, not only Flutter, right? To be fair, React Native as well, if I remember correctly. But basically, from my standpoint, is that this really, I worked back in the days, like years ago, in a company that did releases like once a month, right? So you develop something, and you wait a month to see it in production. That doesn't really bring sense of velocity or speed or anything at all. So I'm quite happy of this approach. Obviously, sometimes things happen, and sometimes you might break your app. But I think it's a good trade-off, indeed. And by the way, back in that time, a monthly release was considered pretty fast. Jonathan, you probably seen the days that like once maybe 6 months or something, especially for the devices like.
Motorola, Nokia. I mean, you don't get immediate releases.
So for government.
No, I don't think
government
today
things.
you're beholden to the app stores. You know what I mean? So it's also difficult. You could still release a feature both at the same time, but Android comes out first. You know if you can appreciate. Back in the day, sometimes you have to wait for a new version to be put into the device itself, having your operating system before you even saw a new feature.
Yeah.
But that's going back to like the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s.
Yeah, I'm not talking that far, but yeah, certainly. Okay, folks.
Last question.
Yeah, last question of the day.
Quick question. So you are using CI/CD on the mobile too, right, or not?
We have actually our mobile engineers here who can tell you a little bit more.
We obviously don't have continuous deployment because we need to build the app and then goes through the release process. But all the building and putting the app to the store is in the pipeline in the GitLab. So basically, it's
Automated.
Manual, yeah, you need to play or start the rollout and then it happens, automatically. But it's not like every request merge to the master trigger the release. Yeah, we have 2 weeks period.
Yeah, so every 2 weeks we do a release.
Yeah.
We
Of course
obviously
we
have release cycles for a release manager. So every 2 weeks we have a new release manager. They come in, and everybody gets to experience that flow, which is important. It's important for every developer to experience it. There's no one person have it and you never generate that experience when you move on to the next company. Have you ever released it yet? No. Well, if you can appreciate it. So it's for us, everyone gets that trophy every 2 weeks. You do it, you press the button, and the continuous delivery begins and automatically goes to the store.
Probably Android and iOS teams are very close together to release the same features at the same time, right? Or not?
I think it depends. Like we were saying, it just depends on the actual teams themselves. themselves. Also, the velocity of each platform. Some platforms, aren't got the same high velocity as others. I've noticed in our pack lately that Android's a little bit ahead of us at the end of the day, but it's also down to resource numbers. I mean, one day we've got a new developer, now we're down to Android developers, for example, where Android was 2 more than iOS. So there's a lot of factors that come into, that kind of a question or a debate, should we say. So there's no set in stone exactly what you're going to get, but we do our best. We do the best we can.
This is actually why kind of groundbreaking things like Flutter comes in, right? Because potentially you can write once and have it on both platforms. Yeah, the release is separate still, but as we said, there are some approaches that might even go around that. So yeah, but I think first part of your question is whether we had continuous integration, right? And yeah, pretty much that's the thing, right? I think it's even the standard across the industry.
I think probably 9 out of 10 use TestFlight. I don't think there's many projects that aren't using TestFlight today. At the end of the day, it's a framework that we use to release and all that.
Just a quick question. What about staging?
We've got we're hooked into Bitrise, so there's 2 or 3 other projects that hook into Bitrise. We've got an API that we've designed directly pumps into Bitrise, so I believe OLX do it a bit more manually than what we do on motors. We've got a separate Docker application, and literally anybody can actually use it. You just need to put in the right keys and things like that, So we've got a full continuous flow from integration through to deployment.
Yeah, on Android we have like daily builds, so every day at around 10 p.m. we build a daily build, so it goes through Firebase app distribution, or for iOS it's TestFlight. So every day we have like our internal testing version where you can switch to the staging. So
yeah, actually,
show me the secret button in the production.
Yeah,
in production it's cut off, so you cannot switch to staging.
Yeah. So this is one thing I believe that mobile apps are actually a little bit behind in terms of what's been happening on the web. Web is much more instant in terms of that because you can you can get a couple things a little bit faster. But I think there is a there is a general direction of getting there, I would say. With Flutter, you said about hot reload, for example, right? And those things, there is hot module replacement. There are like even certain iterations that makes the whole developer experience better.
Complaints with the App Store policy.
So that hot reload only works in debug mode. So then you have so the thing that maybe would be interesting to regarding the deployment is a code push. So there's a company working on code push right now, and on Android it's not a big deal. There's still policies that prevent you from dynamic code execution, but also on Android it's much easier to load dynamic libraries, and they are building a smart diffing algorithm so that only the code that actually is different from one version to the other is going to be run and interpreted, whereas on iOS it's a little bit more difficult. So on iOS you can still, the policy prevents you from updating compiled code, but you can update interpreted code. So for instance, JavaScript or Python, or if you would have a Lua script, you can update this remotely. So what they do is that they try to go under the radar. I mean, they obviously state it openly how they do it. So if Apple would have any remarks, it would be obvious. But what they do is that on iOS, they will have to just interpret these pieces of the Dutch code. On Android, they have this nice diffing algorithm. On iOS, they still don't have the diffing algorithm. So if you want to use code push on iOS, the entire application is interpreted right now. So this is a tricky part because it's 100 times slower than the ahead-of-time compiled application at the moment. But they have some brilliant engineers working on that, Dart compiler engineers. So Eric Seidel, who is the creator of Flutter, actually set up a company that works on code push for Flutter. And they have, if not them, then who? Like they have the skills and the passion to do it, and they know all the bits and the bits of Dart compiler tool chain to make it work. So that, let's say, if you update one method in your client that calls your HTTP API, then only this little piece of code is going to be interpreted, and the rest of the app is going to be ahead of time.
Yeah, and this is, I guess, the future we are all waiting for, at least in terms of the mobile apps right now. So I guess this concludes the meeting, OLX Masterclass Mobile. It was great having you, and those were really great presentations. I mean, everyone here can tell that you guys were really passionate about the stuff you've been talking about. And this is what gives me hope. I mean, in engineering overall, that when I'm seeing this kind of a spark when people are talking about those things. So thanks everyone. Thanks to our audience in the online. Well, we cannot see you, but we know you were there. Thanks for sticking with us. So.